Would you just like to explain how serious the issue of UAPs are and what kinds that we've been seeing? Hello and welcome to GBN Originals with me, Patrick Christys, and today we have a very special guest on possibly the most important topic known to man. It's Avi Loeb, who is a Harvard astrophysicist and a former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. He's also, of course, a world-renowned author. Avi, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, whether or not we are alone in the universe, whether or not we have been visited by alien life, is probably the biggest existential question known to humanity. And you are right at the forefront of trying to answer this for us. And we are actually going to give people a little bit of a preview of something that they might want to bookmark. So if you're watching this video now, bookmark it and maybe revisit it again in a couple of weeks' time. Because, Avi, you're going to a very special event in Congress, aren't you, in relation to UAPs. So would you like to just explain to our viewers and our listeners exactly what's going on there?
Yes, thanks for having me. This will be an event where we brief a new task force that was established in the US Congress to reveal government secrets. And among many tasks, they also will look into unidentified anomalous phenomena. And the briefing will take 2 hours on May 1st, 2025. And we will be describing the scientific aspects of UAP, the national security aspects, as well as the implications for innovation. And there will be 6 people on a panel. I will be one of them, discussing primarily the science.
Okay, because the existence of UAPs is now undeniable. The question, of course, is what they are, where they come from, who's in control of them, and what it means for us. But UAPs have become a massive thing. I think the innovation with technology in terms of cameras and radar, etc., has meant that we are now picking these up. And I think more and more members of, for example, the Air Force are inclined to come forward and discuss it because they don't think that they're going to be cast aside as someone with a mental health issue. But would you just like to explain how serious the issue of UAPs are and what kinds that we've been seeing?
Yeah, there is actually a new, relatively new organization within the Pentagon called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who was tasked to look into past reports of military personnel and figure out what are these unidentified objects that the US military is talking about and the intelligence agencies are seeing. And of course, the data comes not only from people witnessing unusual objects, but also presumably from satellites and from cameras, infrared cameras and optical cameras that are being used. And I actually had a conversation with the head of that office, John Koslowski, and there are some objects, some events that cannot be explained. They don't know what they are. And of course, it's not the task of the US government to figure out what lies outside the solar system. That's the day job of astronomers. And I'm one of them. And if they cannot identify these objects, I think it's duty of scientists like myself to figure out what they are. And so I'm leading the Galileo project at Harvard University. We have already an operating observatory looking at the sky 24/7. We already published a paper about the first 500,000 objects that we looked at over the first 6 months of this observatory. And we are building 2 additional observatories, one in Pennsylvania. In fact, the instruments were just put together this week, and another one in Nevada. And altogether, by summer 2025, we hope to have 3 observatories, each of which will have multiple units that can allow triangulation so that we can figure out the distances to objects. Because a very nearby object might appear to be moving fast, but in fact, it's just because of its proximity that you think that it's moving fast. So distances are crucial to figure out the nature of these objects. And I told my team, if we don't see anything unusual, unfamiliar, nothing that is different from balloons, drones, airplanes, satellites, we will write a paper about the statistics of these UAP and the fact that we can limit how unusual they are. But if we see even one object out of a million, and in fact, we should have a few million objects within a year, If we see 1 out of 1 million that has unusual flight characteristics, unusual material composition, that obviously will be a subject of a single report, a paper, just dedicated to that object. I should also say that as part of the Galileo project, we also went on an expedition to the Pacific Ocean. In 2023, June 2023, there will be a Netflix documentary coming out this calendar year, hopefully, about that expedition. And we retrieved materials from the crash site of the first reported interstellar meteor. And we are currently completing the analysis. We already published 2 papers about what we found. There was some unusual chemical composition of a fraction of the materials that we brought from the ocean floor 2 kilometers deep.
Wow.
And we are now looking into isotopes that could tell us without any doubt if the material came from outside the solar system.
Well, absolutely fascinating stuff. I'm going to return to things that are in outer space or outside of our atmosphere, at least very shortly. But just for now, we've had several quite high-profile cases. So there's been the Go Fast object. There's been, I think, the gimbal as well. There's even been some cases recently of people reporting some jellyfish-like and egg-shaped objects. There's even been reports of, well, I'm going to call them craft, but I suppose UAPs is another one, coming out of the water. And reports of these by people who are in the Air Force, respectable sources, not just people with tinfoil hats on somewhere in the Nevada desert. So does this, do you think, show that potentially we are not alone? That it's all very well and good looking for things in space, but actually there's a good chance that we are being visited by beings or craft right here on Earth?
Yeah, the key is to, first of all, verify that whatever you see is technological in origin, that it's not a bird or some animal or some natural phenomena in the atmosphere. And if it's technological, we know the parameters that bracket our own technologies. And we can easily identify the technology that is beyond what we can produce. And if that's the case, then it couldn't have been human-made, and it must have been made by some other civilization. So it would imply not only that there is life beyond Earth, something that astronomers are very keen on finding, but it will also imply that we might have a smarter kid on our cosmic block. And that is extremely important because we can learn new technologies that represent our future. In particular, if you think about artificial intelligence, AI, that would be probably a very important tool for interstellar travel because as of now, humans cannot survive a trip through interstellar space. They are just too short-lived. And once the human body is bombarded with cosmic rays, it won't survive more than a few years. And these journeys take millions or maybe even billions of years. And it would make a lot of sense to use artificial intelligence for these probes to be autonomous so that they don't need to wait for guidance from the senders. And they would represent monuments of past technological civilizations that may have perished by now. It's just like receiving a package in your mailbox from someone that may not be alive anymore. And we need to look around us. I mean, just in January this year, there was a new object identified by an amateur astronomer near Earth that was claimed to be an asteroid. And the Minor Planet Center, an organization that catalogs near-Earth objects, gave it a label as if it's an asteroid. But then 17 hours later, they realized, in fact, this near-Earth object was the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX because it had exactly the same orbital parameters around the sun. And so here is an example of something that we produced and can be easily mistaken for a rock. And as I must say that only over the past decade, astronomers discovered the first objects from outside the solar system. And the first two, the meteor that I mentioned before, and Oumuamua, which was found in 2017, the size of a football field, they both were anomalous, unlike the rocks that we are familiar with, not like asteroids or comets from the solar system. And all I'm saying is we should be open-minded to consider them as potential space trash. And the only way to figure out their nature is to get as much data as possible about them. Because right now, astronomers deny the possibility. They call them dark comets or unusual rocks. They are unwilling to consider what they call an extraordinary claim, which is that we are not alone. I see that as an ordinary claim because we know of billions of other Earth-Sun analogs based on the latest statistics on exoplanets within the Milky Way galaxy as a whole. And it would be very arrogant of us to assume that we are alone. And when Enrico Fermi asked, where is everybody? He didn't really try to find them. So as any other lonely person, what you tell a lonely person that doesn't have a partner, you tell them, you should go out to dating sites. You should at least look through your windows. And Enrico Fermi didn't build a telescope to search for them.
And just on this then, so how worried should we be about government control or potential censorship of what we may find out there? So if somebody like yourself or someone else who was maybe directly working for a government agency actually found something that was anomalous, that looked for all the world, if you'll excuse the pun, as though it was, an artificial intelligence, it was, a craft from another planet or another universe or whatever, another world, sorry, then that would they be able to stifle the release of that information?
I don't think they should be allowed to stifle the release of that information for the same reason that they couldn't suppress the information that there was a Big Bang, or that we are not, that the Vatican was misguided by trying to suppress the information that Earth is not at the center of the universe. Eventually, even if you insist that you don't have such evidence and hide it, eventually someone else will find the evidence. The sky is not classified. And if you want to hide the information, you wouldn't be successful in the long run. And I believe that if the government has data that looks really anomalous, they are not releasing the data for two possible reasons. One, it was collected by classified censors. And as a result, they don't want to expose the capabilities of those classified censors to adversarial nations. And the second is that if they cannot figure out what it means, if they just see something behaving in ways they don't understand, they don't want to admit that they're incapable of explaining it. So they're hiding it.
Could there be a third option? Could there be a third option as well, Avi? Sorry for interrupting you, but could it be that they want to get hold of that technology and harness it themselves, and they don't want their, well, quotes unquote, enemies like Russia or China to get hold of it?
Well, I haven't seen evidence for that in the battlefield. I haven't seen technologies that do not represent the science as we know it right now. I can imagine that there might be corporations that are saying to government, give me money and I'll look into it. And, it takes them a long time to figure it out because they are not necessarily having the very best scientists in the world engaged in that. But on the other hand, just like a psychiatrist that treats a patient, they would prefer to not to cure the issue, to resolve the issue because they get paid for it. So you might have a situation where they keep getting paid for something that they cannot figure out. And all I'm saying is government should allow scientists like myself to look into it and help them figure it out. Because, from a distance, if you go 10 times farther than the Earth-Sun separation, even the best telescopes we currently employ cannot resolve national borders on Earth. You can't really tell that the Earth is split among nations. And therefore, if you imagine a visit from outside the solar system, they didn't have us in mind. They didn't have nations in mind. This kind of information about what lies outside the solar system should be shared by all humans. It's scientific information, and we should all know about it. In fact, it may bring all of us together because we would feel part of the same family, a same species on this rock that we were born on, as soon as we realize that we have neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually think for anyone who happens to be in favour of globalisation, and I think at the moment that does appear to be most people on the left, then the way to reinforce that to a very skeptical public who are, and I bracket myself in this, by the way, I'm a fan of a strong border generally, but the way to reinforce the idea that we are really a global community is to show us that there are things out there that are not us and are not from this world, and that maybe we all need to work together, and it expands the horizons. I would suggest to them that's the way to convince people.
Just a comment on that. I do believe that science is better than politics. And the reason I say that, so it's not a matter of appealing to one side or the other of the political spectrum. The reason that science is better than politics is because, first of all, it's a unifying endeavor, in the sense that whatever we find about nature can be shared and used by everyone. And the second is that, with science, we can resolve a lot of the issues, the challenges that we face. And once again, it's something that all of us can use. So we were able to, about 100,000 years ago, to leave the jungles of Africa, and the current modern humans were able to end up in high rises in cities right now. And that's an amazing feat that was enabled by science and technology. And the next step forward would be to leave Earth and go into some artificial space platform that allows us to explore space, because there is much more real estate beyond Earth. And all of our troubles stem from the fact that we focus on this rock that we were born. We fight over territories. We look down on other people. But if you change the perspective and look up, then you realize that, we were not that intelligent all along.
So we've mentioned their telescopes. You've mentioned a couple of other ways in which we can have a look for what may be going on in outer space. What other ways are there? I mean, I've got here, to bounce or not to bounce. That is the question. You discuss the possibility of bouncing radio signals off hypothetical objects on the other side of the solar system. Can you explain what that is, please? This video is sponsored by Saily. Saily is a brand new eSIM service app. What it does is get you a local SIM card that you can use when you're traveling, so you don't have to pay those crazy roaming fees just to send a text back home. They've got eSIM plans in over 160 countries and 8 regions, so pretty much wherever you're going, they'll be able to make sure you're connected. So how does it work? Well, all you've got to do is hit our link in the description to download the app. It will work on iOS or Android. Buy a plan. You can choose the best time frame for you, and then just install the eSIM on your phone. When you land at your holiday destination, you can activate your plan instantly. Saily eSIMs only ever have to be installed once, so when you go on your next trip, you just buy a plan for a new country, turn that eSIM back on, and just like that, you could be watching the GB News YouTube channel. You can be connected anywhere you go, and you don't have to deal with patchy Wi-Fi in your hotels. So get sorted for your next trip by downloading Saily using the link in the description below. And if you use our code NEWS at checkout, you'll get an exclusive 15% discount on us.
Yeah, well, there are various ways to detect unusual objects. Astronomers in the past use light, conventional telescopes, but you can imagine, for example, stealth objects that are invisible to us. In fact, 85% of the matter in the universe is invisible. It's labeled dark matter, and 70% of the entire energy budget of the universe is in the form of dark energy, and we don't know what these are at the moment. And you can imagine that another civilization could potentially use these entities for propulsion, for constructing probes or fueling them. At any event, there could be objects that are passing near Earth that are not visible using, the standard instruments that we are currently employing to look at the universe. And the best way to see them is something that is inevitable, that they would produce a gravitational signal on Earth. And we currently have detectors for gravitational waves. These are ripples of space and time. And I argue that in principle, you can use those detectors in the future to find invisible objects that pass near Earth. So that's exciting. But of course, you can always try to look for objects that reflect sunlight. And for that, we need a space telescope dedicated for the task of looking for interstellar objects, because among the rocks, we might find some space trash. All I'm saying is that maybe Elon Musk was not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. There might be interstellar cars, just like the Tesla Roadster car that he launched. And we should look for them among all the interstellar objects that pass near Earth. At the moment, we're missing almost all of them. We just detected a few over the past decade, and I'm suggesting let's put billions of dollars to that search, because currently the astronomy community is willing to invest more than $10 billion in the search for microbes. And I say microbes are much more boring than intelligent neighbors that we might have.
Well, there's a possibility, correct me if I'm wrong here from what you're saying, but whilst we are spending billions of dollars looking for microbes and microbiology and all of that, we might be missing the opportunity to find basically a functioning bit of kit that has been cast aside by an intelligent civilization elsewhere in the universe that we could use, that would fundamentally revolutionize the way that we live.
Right. It would inspire us to do better in the sense of focusing on where most of the real estate is, which is beyond Earth. And it will change our perspective about our future. Right now, we are developing artificial intelligence here that could potentially take our place. I'm worried about the impact that it may have on the human brain. That is a subject that is not discussed much, but there is.
Talk to me about that then. Why? Because the conventional wisdom is that AI is great, that we're all going to end up with a neural link somewhere in our heads, and we're all going to be Google. So what's bad about all of that?
Well, there are indications that the more you rely on AI, the more you lose your cognitive abilities to do some of the same tasks. And I'm worried about the young generation. In fact, the infants of today, they are born into a world where artificial intelligence and content on digital screens will always exceed their own cognitive abilities, because within 10 years, all forecasts are that AI will do better than humans on most cognitive tasks. And so these infants of today will live in a world where they will not need to know much. They could always ask the AI system. They will get emotionally attached to AI systems that will tailor their response to the wishes of humans. And there is a risk that the human brain will change as a result. We know that the human brain responds to the environment. And if the environment includes mostly interactions with AI systems, then it's clear that the human brain will look different, or at least evolve differently in the future than it is today. And that could be one solution to Fermi's paradox. Where is everybody? If other civilizations got addicted to their AI systems and lost interest in the physical reality, that in the exploration of interstellar space, we might not hear from them because of that. And the only way to find such civilizations that got addicted to AI or digital screens would be it's just like searching for the bodies of drug addicts on the cosmic streets. We will see them losing interest in the physical reality. And that will be a very dangerous or cautionary tale about our own future. And I think finding alien civilizations could serve an important purpose of letting us know about the possible outcomes of technologies. It's not always good. We have to make the right choice when we face decisions about policy and about what we want to do in the long term, beyond just fighting with each other.
Well, exactly. And again, it might lead to people losing the desire to reproduce. It might be something quite soulless about that if they're entirely engaged with whatever alternate reality they decide that they want to live in. How urgent do you think it is that we are going to have to find another home as a species? I saw with some interest there was supposedly some comet that was going to there's a 4% chance of it hitting the moon or something last time, or an asteroid. Sorry, you'll correct me on this. But
yeah,
a 4% chance of hitting the moon.
There is an asteroid with a 3% chance of hitting the moon. It was previously thought to potentially hit the Earth. There are risks from space, for example, an asteroid impact, but these will be in the long run. There is nothing currently known that is approaching Earth within the next few decades that is of real danger. I would have loved to have such a risk because it would bring more people into science. The young people would be inspired to save humanity by deflecting such an object. But we don't have such a risk immediately. However, we know that 66 million years ago, the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct as a result of an impact like that. So over periods of tens of millions of years, it's definitely a huge risk. In addition, of course, there could be risks from giant solar flares from the sun or from an exploding star nearby over timescales of millions of years. But I think the biggest risk to humanity is death from self-inflicted wounds. And that could be either a result of AI being used by bad actors or actually sabotaging the human mind in a way that humans do a lot of damage to their own civilization. That could very well happen as a result of AI taking control of the human mind. So I'm worried about that. And of course, we need to think about preventing such doomsday scenarios. But I do think we need to go to space because, we are used to comfortable life over periods of decades or maybe a century. But, once you think about the very long term, it's really important not to have the risk of going extinct as a result of a single point catastrophe here on Earth. So we want to, we went from trees in the jungle to high rises in cities, and we want to go to space so that altogether we have communities in many different places. I'm not an optimist that communities in space necessarily will have better politics than you find here on Earth, because humans will bring their own politics with them. But I do think that the risk of extinction is minimized by having many places where humans reside. And space is an obvious destination. And right now, of course, it's becoming popular to talk about space tourism. But I think beyond that, I think it's important for the survival of humanity.
Well, I am desperate to go to space. So if anyone happens to be watching or listening to this that has the capacity or the money or the resources or the will to just fire me off into space, you don't even have to bring me back, as far as I'm concerned. I'd be quite happy out there for as long as I could cling on to life. But just a couple more questions while I've got you, if that's okay. Because
yes,
you mentioned a couple of times about politics here, and unfortunately we can't separate ourselves from it. Do you think that we're more likely to have a big explosion in space research, in innovation, and almost like public wonder again, probably a bit like we had with the Apollo missions, under this particular US President Trump or under other administrations like the previous Biden one?
Well, I think the key is really to identify the challenges for human existence in space, which are not being discussed much. And, one of them is providing some artificial gravity if we don't go to another planet. I mean, there is the desire to go to Mars that is the vision of Elon Musk. However, that's equivalent to going from the rock that we currently occupy to another rock. It's just like jumping from one tree to another. In the jungle, it's not very different, fundamentally. I think what we really need to think about is establishing a space platform that would have some artificial gravity so that we will not lose bone mass as we do now when we go to microgravity. There will need to be a protection from cosmic rays. On Mars, that can be accomplished by going underground into caves. And so in a way, this will be ironic for humans to go back into caves. It would be interesting to check if there are any markings or paintings on the walls of those caves if Mars happened to have complex animals and intelligent life
do you
before
think that's
it lost
likely
its
that
atmosphere.
we might discover that actually we had Martians before we had Earthlings?
I mean, we may have started on Mars and then life might have been delivered to Earth in a rock. That's quite likely, I would say, because Mars cooled earlier than Earth. So it might have had life as we know it before Earth did. Wow. It's a smaller body. There is also, one may wonder if there are other civilizations. The most successful ones are the ones that arrive at our backyard before we get to their backyards. And I was visited by a group of Christian believers, Christianity Today, members of that community, and they asked me how would that discovery affect their religious beliefs. And I said, I have two daughters, and when the second one was born, I didn't lose any of my love to the first one. And so if you do believe in God, having multiple civilizations is not an issue for a parent that is sufficiently capable, and just it will be the meaning of God's abilities to imagine that superhuman entity can attend only to one civilization. So I do think that humans can adapt to the notion, and moreover, that in fact, if they are more accomplished than we are, I mean, there might be some jealousy involved, but we can learn from them and get better, because clearly there is a lot of room for improvement if you read the news every day.
Yeah, indeed, which I do for a living. So there you go. But I'm glad you mentioned the religion side of it there, because I was going to ask about that, and I think that's a lovely answer. Just final question, if that's okay, because there's a chap. Well, there's a few people now actually. One of them is a guy called Jake Barber, who's done some big interviews. One of them is with Australian reporter, I should say, Ross Coulthart, who I think does some really interesting work. He says that he was in the US Air Force, and that he worked in crash retrieval. So that included things like egg-shaped objects that he believes are not from this earth, and they were then retrieved. He said that he then had some emotional connections with a couple of them, connections that he can't explain. He also suggests that amongst numerous different secret services, so not just in the United States, but quite possibly with other countries as well, there are people called psionics who have some kind of mental capacity as human beings to be able to summon objects from, well, presumably other civilizations and other life forms. So quite a lot to digest there. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very intriguing. And of course, I'm motivated to get more data on these objects, given those reports. But we have to keep in mind that very often humans have wishful thinking, and they believe something that is not real. Okay, that happens a lot. And that's why FIFA, the World Soccer Organization, is using cameras to decide what happened on the soccer field, rather than ask the players or the audience. In science, we use instruments because they are measuring whatever happens, and then you look at the data and decide how to interpret it. Humans are not reliable detectors. However, there might be circumstances where either they notice something unusual and they don't have time to record it, or they see something but don't have the ability to verify the nature of the object.
Or the recording is, of course, classified.
Yeah, and so my duty as a scientist is to substantiate that. The worst that a scientist can do is say, I don't want to look into it. I don't want to find evidence, which is pretty much the view of the mainstream of astronomy right now, focusing on microbes and not studying anomalous objects that are reported near Earth. I would argue that not only we need to spend the time, but also spend the money, billions of dollars, on trying to figure out what these anomalous objects might be. And anyone that has a problem with that is actually expressing anti-science sentiments. And when I went to the Pacific Ocean, there were some astronomers who pushed back against it. And, it's really surprising for me to see anti-science sentiments coming from scientists, because I didn't ask them to put any time or money. I was fully funded for that. And so my message is we should maintain our childhood curiosity without having an agenda, without having prejudice, and just collect as much data as possible, have a flood of data so that it will be impossible to misinterpret what these objects are. If they are human-made, so be it, we move on. if they are extraterrestrial, that would open a new chapter in the history of humanity, and we will be all inspired to improve ourselves, to somehow figure out what our neighbors are, to communicate with them, and to learn from them.
Absolutely. And by the way, I do think that people in positions of power shouldn't underestimate the public's level of acceptance for these things and their ability to digest that information and accept it without going feral.
I see myself as a member of the public. I am just curious, and by chance, I happen to be capable of collecting evidence through the scientific method. And I haven't lost my childhood curiosity, and I will never surrender. I told the students, first year students at Harvard, just last week in a class, I said, never pretend to be the adults in the room. Maintain your childhood curiosity. This is really the best you can do to be authentic scientist.
It's a beautiful message to finish on. Avi, thank you very much. I always thoroughly enjoy talking to you and just dipping into this pond or lake or ocean of information that you've got in your head there. So thank you so much. And hey, maybe one day we will be having another interview where we've answered some of the questions, or you have answered anyway some of the questions that we've been posing today. That will be a wonderful thing. So Avi, take care.
Thing, yeah. It will be just like the coming of the Messiah, so to speak.
Absolutely. All the best, Avi Loeb there. Thank you very, very much. Harvard astrophysicist, former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, and a world-renowned author. And just remember what I said at the start as well. Bookmark this, couple of weeks' time. We're going to be seeing what goes on in Congress. Thank you very much. Take care.